How should you tell a story? It's a question with many different considerations, depending on the story you want to tell and the medium you're telling it in. But no medium offers a more dizzying number of options than video games. With games, you can utilize techniques from novels to tell your story through text, use music to convey emotion, or employ various photography and filmmaking techniques. But because of their interactivity, games can also employ a range of new methods as well. And looking across the medium, it doesn't take long to notice vast differences between the ways games tell their stories. For example, The Last of Us titles take a very cinematic approach, relying on detailed 3D imagery and hours of motion capture cutscenes. Between cutscenes, lengthy voice-acted dialogue and banter runs through gameplay to fully immerse the player in the game's narrative.
Where's the ladder?
It's gotta be around here somewhere.
A game like Undertale takes a radically different approach, delivering story through text and hand-animated 2D sprites. Based on how the player behaves in-game, it also features multiple endings with meta-elements that could only make sense for a video game. Based on the experiences each of these games is aiming for, I'd say they chose excellent ways to deliver their stories. But I want to talk about a game I love that I think made many, many mistakes in its approach to storytelling that, frankly, really bug me. And that game is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. First, context. The Legend of Zelda franchise has a special place in my heart, and the latest entries in the series, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, are potentially my favorite games in the series. They came off the heels of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, an extremely linear entry in the series, with great mechanics and puzzles, and grooves, but very little of the free exploration I had fallen in love with in earlier games in the series like Twilight Princess and Wind Waker. Certainly much less than you'd think for a game whose major selling point is flying wherever you want in the sky on the back of a giant bird. Skyward Sword's issues thankfully did not go unnoticed by Nintendo. Maybe they were responding to external criticism, or maybe the team internally recognized the game's issues on their own. In any case, the next installment in the series, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, was a massive shift in design for the series. A full-on rejection of the linearity in previous titles, Breath of the Wild's entire concept was built on an open world with an absurd level of player freedom for players to do things in any order they wanted, in any way they wanted. And not just in terms of exploration, puzzle solving, combat, even the story. There was no correct way to play through any of it. On the gameplay front, Nintendo placed a heavy emphasis on what they call multiplicative gameplay. They described their approach at a talk just before the game's release.
In our various experiments of trial and error with game physics, there was one thing that we noticed. If you unify your game world with a set of consistent physics rules, the player will come up with ideas for all sorts of things they want to try. So for example, this metal slab is placed here to allow you to cross this river. But once you pick it up, you might find yourself suddenly wanting to try dropping it on top of an enemy. Just riding a log down a river seems like it would be fun. What would happen if you climbed an object that you'd charged up with energy using stasis? My point is that I ended up getting flooded with ideas like this. My excitement was coming not from my perspective as a developer, but as a player. What if I tried that? Or wait, maybe this? Just like with physics, creating puzzles with solutions that reference the way the real world works can help players solve them instinctively. And so, we decided to develop a chemistry engine. Action games are made up of collision plus movement plus changing states. And it's our chemistry engine that calculates these changes in the state of things. The model is an extremely simple one, but allows for the expression of all sorts of events. All the constituent parts of the world we created are governed by our rules of physics and chemistry. This multiplicative gameplay is found in the space between situations and goals. If you can see these connections between elements in the world, the scenery around you takes on new meaning and poses questions to you.
How then do you deliver a story in a game about near limitless freedom and exploration? Breath of the Wild's plot is broken up into two distinct eras, the past and the present. 100 years ago, the Kingdom of Hyrule was preparing for the prophesized return of Calamity Ganon, an angry, almost formless, swirling incarnation of the series' big bad Ganon. Using ancient Sheikah tech found buried underground, Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions plan to take down Ganon. But when Ganon does return, our protagonists fail. Ganon seizes control of the Sheikah tech and turns it against the denizens of Hyrule, killing all 4 of the champions. Link falls protecting Zelda and is brought to the Shrine of Resurrection, where he sleeps for 100 years recovering, only to awaken without his memories. And him waking up, well, that's where the game begins. The way Breath of the Wild tells its story works well. Players need to explore the open world to take back control of the possessed Sheikah technology and to recover Link's own memories, which are found in various locations depicted on Link's Sheikah slate. It doesn't matter what order the player chooses to experience the story in. Each region's present-day campaign and story are self-contained into mini-arcs. And rather than plot, the memories Link finds from 100 years ago are primarily focused on fleshing out characterization for Zelda and the rest of the cast, which lends itself well to discovering each memory non-linearly in any order that you want. Breath of the Wild's story is not without faults, and what it attempts is certainly not the reinvention for the series the same way as the rest of the game's elements, but it is fitting. The same cannot be said for its direct sequel, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. In many ways, Tears of the Kingdom doubles down on the choices made in Breath of the Wild, both the good and the bad. It offers the player even more freedom in exploration and puzzle solving through its new set of abilities, thanks in large part to the absolutely bonkers addition of letting players build basically any vehicle they want from the game's wide selection of parts and items. On the story front, Tears is unambiguously more ambitious than its predecessor, though it also tries to reuse much of the presentation structure from Breath of the Wild, and it doesn't work nearly as well this time around. First, I want to talk about what the game gets right: the opening. The game starts with a linear story section, where Link and Zelda are investigating tunnels beneath Hyrule Castle looking for the source of a new substance called gloom, which is causing people all across Hyrule to fall ill. As the pair head further underground, Zelda stops to point out ruins she suspects belong to the Zonai, a little known about ancient tribes said to have descended from the heavens. The gloom, the dark underground tunnels with ominous music, these elements all slowly build tension and suspense, until Link and Zelda finally step out into a large cavern where they find the source of the gloom. A mummy, seemingly being restrained by a glowing green arm emanating the substance in wisps. As the pair approach, the green arm falters, and a stone tumbles away from it, stopping at Zelda's feet. She cautiously picks it up, causing it to glow. Meanwhile, the mummy begins to twist and snap, shooting out a massive attack towards Link and Zelda that lands a powerful blow, wounding Link and shattering the Master Sword. The mummy begins to speak.
Zelda, you who carries that fragile sword, a Link. Rauru placed his faith in you, and that was all you could do.
Horrified, Zelda asks how the mummy knows their names, but the walking corpse is no longer interested in talking. He begins forcing the castle above them into the sky with a huge burst of power, causing the ground beneath him to collapse. The mummy falls into the darkness, and Zelda, standing on unstable ground, falls as well. Link jumps, reaching for her, but is unable to grab her arm. Surprisingly, Zelda then vanishes right in front of his eyes. Now plummeting himself, Link is rescued by the floating green arm that had been restraining the mummy before they arrived. The arm lifts Link into the sky, and the camera shifts to the world above in chaos, the castle rising as debris rains down from the sky. When the player next gains control, Link finds himself surrounded by clouds, with floating islands all around him. The story in Tears of the Kingdom is a mystery through and through, and the game's opening does an amazing job of giving the player questions they want to learn answers to. Who was that mummy underground? What's going on with that glowing arm? How did the mummy know Link and Zelda's names? Who is Rauru? Where did the Sky Islands come from? Who put them there? Who are the Zonai? What's going on with the glowing stone Zelda picked up? Where is Zelda? As players progress through the Great Sky Island, the game's tutorial, they will soon watch the broken Master Sword vanish in front of them, leading to even more questions. Is the sword broken beyond repair? Where did it go? This opening is one heck of a hook, and players are bound to be wondering about all these things as they play through the game. The problem is that mysteries like this tend to make players actually think about the game's story and try to put everything together themselves. But if you try to figure out what's going on in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, you're going to be left unsatisfied very quickly. For starters, there's those questions players are likely to have. Unfortunately, the game is not nearly interested enough in its own story to answer many of them. Where did the Sky Islands come from? There's like 2 lines of text about it in a quest in Kakariko Village that barely mentions one structure being lifted into the sky, and it doesn't tell you why. What happened to all the Shikatech from the past game? It's all gone, no explanation. Purah and Robbie seem to be using some of it, but you can't ask them what happened to the rest. The divine beasts, the shrines, vanished, without a trace. Players will soon learn that the main villain, the mummy they found under Hyrule Castle, is Ganondorf, another incarnation of Ganon. But they will not learn how 2 incarnations of Ganon supposedly existed at the same time during Breath of the Wild, nor will they ever learn Ganondorf's motivation because he's never really given one. What happened to the Zonai? Why are they called Secret Stones? What's the secret? What do you mean there isn't one? And while the game is uninterested in answering many of the reasonable questions players are likely to have, it also hits them over the head again and again with the same mysteries long after they're likely to have worked them out. The most egregious example is the Zelda we keep seeing pop up all over Hyrule. For any players even remotely paying attention, it will be obvious early on that this Zelda we keep seeing is some kind of farce. Yet the game gives the player no opportunity to share this information with others, and expects players to want to chase after and rescue her from Hyrule Castle near the end of the game after completing all 4 of the game's major dungeons. It's so obvious that Link is walking into a trap, but players are forced to pretend like they don't know what's going on. It's a bizarre disconnect. Even more bizarre, the way the game chose to show players nearly the exact same cutscene after completing each of the aforementioned main dungeons in the game. By the 3rd dungeon, I could not believe my eyes, I could not believe my ears. What were they thinking? Then, there's the memories. Unlike Breath of the Wild, the locations you find the geoglyphs in aren't tied to the actual contents of the memories this time around. The geoglyphs themselves suggest something about the content of each scene, but the connections are loose enough that players are unlikely to be able to speculate much just from looking at them. And unlike in Breath of the Wild, these memories belong to Zelda, not Link. These 2 factors alone mean that the memories in Tears of the Kingdom are diminished in effectiveness from their counterparts in Breath of the Wild. But I haven't even mentioned the worst part yet. Because Tears of the Kingdom has a more ambitious narrative than Breath of the Wild, it uses the memories to tell a linear story about what happens to Zelda after you lose her underneath Hyrule Castle. And unlike in Breath of the Wild, viewing memories in the wrong order can significantly mess things up this time around. If you happen to stumble into tier number 8 early on in the game, which just so happens to be located near the dungeon the game heavily nudges players towards completing first, you'll spoil a major character death early and render the previous chronological memory completely obsolete. Curious about what happened to the Master Sword? If you happen to head up to the Sword Geoglyph first, you'll spoil what happens to Zelda, trivializing all of the other memories. If you follow the exact order that the geoglyphs appear in the Forgotten Temple from left to right, you can guarantee that you'll view the memories in the right order. Thankfully, this is how I chose to play the game. But this method isn't really encouraged in-game, and even if it were, it's unrealistic to expect players to play the game this way. This is what it looks like to have the method of story delivery fighting against the game itself. Which brings us to the root of the problem: Nintendo's approach to storytelling. Here's a translated line from Eiji Aonuma, the producer of the Legend of Zelda series, describing his approach. I've never really made a game where you think of the story first, and then you go into gameplay. First, you think of the gameplay. What you're thinking of after that is how you can get players to understand that gameplay. The story becomes used as a vessel because it has a beginning and end, and the player moves through it. I think it would actually be kind of difficult to do the reverse and start with the story, then try to match the gameplay mechanics to that. In other words, the story only becomes a consideration late into game development, and its purpose is to serve as a kind of wrapper for the gameplay that teaches mechanics to players and gives the game a clear beginning and end. This likely explains why Breath of the Wild's story is so minimal, and why the more ambitious story in Tears of the Kingdom is a mess. The Sky Islands, possibly the main selling point for the game, were almost certainly something the team wanted early on in development, but they never found a narrative reason for them to exist, so there isn't one. What strikes me as odd, though, is that much of the story in Tears of the Kingdom doesn't even serve the purpose of getting players to understand gameplay. Ganondorf swearing fealty to King Rauru, Sonia teaching Zelda to use her time powers by asking an object where it came from, Zelda voicing her concerns about an upcoming battle to Rauru. None of these inclusions tell players how to do anything, and since almost all of the memories are optional, it's kind of hard to say that the player moves through them. To be clear, I'm not saying these non-gameplay inclusions are bad, but I struggle to see how they fit into the philosophy Nintendo claims to have. This is just speculation, but these details make it hard for me not to feel like there are people at Nintendo that want more for the Zelda game stories, but don't know how to make it happen within the company's existing priorities. Okay, that was a lot of criticism, and it might be starting to sound like I hate this game, but I don't, I promise. Like I said earlier, it's one of my favorite games in the series, and it's because I love Zelda so much that I want to see it tell better stories in the future. But to understand how it could do that, I think it's time to look out. Outer Wilds. Like I said at the start, there are many different approaches games can take for storytelling, and what works for one game is not necessarily right for another. Still, I think Outer Wilds shares enough goals with Tears of the Kingdom that it's worth giving it a look. Like Tears of the Kingdom, the story in Outer Wilds is a mystery. The game starts with the player waking up under the stars next to a campfire. In this game, you're an alien from the planet Timberhearth, but you're not just any Hearthian. You're the newest member of the planet's Outer Wilds space program, and you're set to make your inaugural flight out into space to learn about the solar system. Before you can lift off, you need to get your hands on the launch codes for your ship. So, you head over to get them from Hornfels, at the top level of the observatory. Before you reach him, though, you're likely to look around the lower floor of the observatory, a museum filled with exhibits about the solar system. You'll probably have a trippy encounter with a quantum shard of rock, and walk on a wall using the museum's gravity crystal, among other things. Of particular interest are some exhibits about the Nomai, an ancient alien civilization with ruins scattered everywhere throughout the solar system that mysteriously vanished. After getting the launch codes from Hornfels, you head back down the stairs and have a very odd encounter with an old Nomai artifact, a statue which turns towards the player suddenly and opens a trio of glowing eyes at them. Suddenly, your memories of wandering around the observatory play back to you, shrinking away and towards the statue, all the way back to when you woke up under the stars. And then... nothing. You seem to be unharmed, and now you're free to leave Timberhearth and explore anywhere you like in the game's open-world solar system. No matter where you choose to explore, you'll probably find clues about the Nomai or strange things happening in the solar system. But you won't get far before... the sun goes supernova, vaporizing the Outer Wilds solar system and everything in it, yourself included. But after you die, your memories play back to you again, just as they did when you first encountered the statue. And you wake up under the stars again, hearing the crackle of the campfire. Like the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, players are likely to have many questions. Why did the sun just explode? How am I back where I started? What happened to the Nomai? What's going on with that statue? Unlike Tears of the Kingdom, Outer Wilds doesn't just have answers to all these questions. It's all about answering them. But how did a game like this come to be? Well, it might surprise you to learn that like the 3D open-world Zelda games, Outer Wilds was partially a reaction to The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. But I'll let someone a little more qualified than me explain how.
What about Skyward Sword kind of inspired certain choices in Outer Wilds that I was maybe reacting to? And I think the simple version is Skyward Sword, it doesn't trust the player, is the easy way to say it. You have that character Fi who kind of just tells you the solution to everything. The game ostensibly feels like it should be very exploration-based. You have this really open sky area and these cool mechanics. You fly a bird around, you can skydive underneath the clouds. And I'm not going to criticize the game for like things they obviously did on purpose, right? They were like going for this, which was like having these very kind of linear areas. But the degree to which it just felt kind of suffocating. The lack of level design freedom combined with the game never trusting you to have kind of more than one path open to you at a given time. And as a big Zelda fan, it just kind of bummed me out because it was just very easy to think of like all the interesting things that they could have done with the setup. Because it's a really cool setup. It's like, oh, the humans live above the sky, no one's been to the surface. And it's been so long they don't even remember what's down there. And I was like, it's like, oh, this is cool. And then I get down to the surface and I look up and I'm like, I can see the blue sky. I just went through like a mile of clouds. What? And then now I was like, oh, they don't care. Okay. It really is sort of just the hand-holdiness. The fact that they just don't trust you as a player. And the game clearly had no interest in being a game about exploration. And exploration had always been something that I really loved about the Zelda series. So it was just a bummer to play a Zelda game that was very, very cool and good in a lot of different ways, but it's like someone just surgically removed the parts that I specifically had always loved about the series. Some of the things that I then was like, okay, what if we did this X, Y, and Z in Outer Wilds? Just kind of the loose idea of, I think that kind of inspired me to look back at like, okay, well, what is it about other older games, Zelda or otherwise, that pulled me into their exploration, led me to the Wind Waker, thinking about the pictograph gallery, which kind of inspired this approach of tell the player a story about something that does really exist. Like give them enough information where if they're curious, they can go investigate. So I think Skyward Sword just got me thinking about like, well, what was it about the older ones that worked for me, right? And again, other games do this stuff as well. And so Outer Wilds then, of course, was built on this premise of you find a thing, it points you to another thing. And it being very nonlinear, right? Like, and very hands-off. Dark Souls came out the same year as Skyward Sword. And I think Dark Souls, it's like way over-referenced. But no, people talk about it for a reason, especially someone who's like in game school at the time. The idea that you could make a game like that just didn't have a map, that just was like, have fun, good luck. I just really loved that experience of feeling like I was exploring a world that was pushing back against me. The environment was pushing back, and that's also in Outer Wilds, right? You're exploring these planets, and these huge, large-scale physical things are happening. And if you don't know what's going on, which you don't as a new player, you die. You die real fast.
Like Zelda, Outer Wilds responded to Skyward Sword's linearity with open exploration, though it does so with a slightly different approach.
We ended up solving the problem from a very leaning heavily on narrative, right? Like in this, making players curious about the world through the story. And you learn about the rules of the world through the story. And Breath of the Wild leans more on the, ooh, that thing looks cool in the distance, I'm gonna go check it out. We do try to seed your curiosity in the observatory, in the village museum, because we kind of want, our design goal was we kind of want players to be exploring not completely randomly, not just like, I'm gonna go wherever looks cool. Like, that's fine at first, and people are gonna always do that to some degree, but we really wanted to create an experience where you're like, ooh, I want to learn more about this. Like, I am curious about this thing that was mentioned, so I'm going to follow the lead that I got.
This method of using the story to motivate players to explore is present in Tears. Players interested in the memories are likely to want to seek out the next geoglyph to learn more, for example, but it's certainly not a core part of the game's identity in the way it is for Outer Wilds. Now though, I'd like to talk about how players uncover the story. Like Tears of the Kingdom, Outer Wilds tells a linear story scattered all across its open world that can be discovered by players in any order. But unlike Tears, you're pretty unlikely to spoil yourself.
By the end of the game, players can put together the history of the Nomai in this linear fashion. And so it's like, how did we make it where You can do it in any order. Players find things in different orders from each other. And they're obviously finding things out of order in terms of like when it happened in the narrative. So like, how did we have it work for different players discovering things in different order? I think, so the root of our approach, if you look in the ship log in the game, there are actually 4.5 major mysteries. Internally, dev-wise, we call them curiosities. And they are the big narrative kind of questions that you answer as you play the game. So they are the Ash Twin Project, the Quantum Moon, specifically the 6th location of the Quantum Moon, the sunken module at the core of Giant's Deep, and the vessel. So we consider those to be the 4 curiosities. The comet is sort of like an honorable mention. It's sort of a mini one. And the thing that all 4 of those curiosities share in common is that they relate to each other in the time, like they exist on a shared timeline of the history of the solar system. But the questions that they answer to the player narratively, it doesn't matter. We try, or at least we tried really hard to make it where it wouldn't matter which of those curiosities you found first, because they answer questions that don't necessarily spoil you on the other curiosities. It seems like everything is tightly woven together, but really there are several discrete mysteries, and we are very careful about information from one mystery not spoiling the player on the other mystery. And that goes from like the final reveal at the curiosity location all the way up to like the individual clues. And you have situations where sometimes there's like a know my conversation and they're like dancing around a point that you're like, why aren't you just saying the word? And it's because we're like, well, what if they don't know this other thing over here yet, the player? If you jump to the end of a curiosity, it will spoil everything before that. So it's like if you get into Ash Twin early, because Sun Station is part of that curiosity chain. So it's like, yeah, Ash Twin will spoil Sun Station, it'll spoil High Energy Lab, it'll spoil anything connected, really.
Mechanically, the games share another core piece of DNA, a heavy reliance on systems with clear rules. Remember the complex physics and chemistry engines in Breath of the Wild? Well, Outer Wilds doesn't have those, but it does have something similar.
So Breath of the Wild, it's very systems heavy, right? I think it's much more systems heavy than Outer Wilds at a small scale. Outer Wilds is systems heavy at a larger scale, right? And also we're a small team. The Zelda team is far bigger. But what they accomplished is crazy. Even though each of those 4 curiosities I mentioned, there are these rules you learn to access them. We very much thought of it less as puzzles and more as we're creating these physical systems. And it was important to us that they felt like systems and not like mechanisms. And then once you, and then instead of, we weren't thinking of them as clues, we were thinking them as rules that you learn. And I think the quantum curiosity is the clearest with this because we straight up called them, here are the quantum rules, right? What I mean when I say we tried to design systems where you learn rules about the systems as opposed to puzzles that have solutions or mechanisms. A good example of this is very early in development. The original, when I was thinking about the Ash Twin Project curiosity and how do you get to the core of Ash Twin, because that was a thing very, very early on. And originally I was thinking it would be this kind of, almost like imagine like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, how to get to the Grail, there are these 3 challenges and they each have like almost riddles. Something of that nature. I remember when I was like, okay, once you get past like the first one, there's going to be like this endless corridor where you're walking in a circle around the planet and there's a trick to how you have to do it. And I was thinking they would be like security mechanisms, essentially, that the Nomai had put in place to keep anyone from tampering with this who didn't have, I don't know, clearance, or this was a long time ago. And I don't remember what caused the shift in thinking, but something about that just didn't feel right, where the player was, pushing a button and something happens. It's more like, no, the player understands something. And now the player has agency that they did not before, but they are not like affecting change in a very direct way. And so that led to the idea of like, okay, well, what if it's this ring of teleporters, which is not natural, right? It's the Nomai built those, but it's natural from the player's perception of, oh, this is just a thing that happens and it operates in a very particular way.
The way Outer Wilds' story is interwoven with its mechanics and gameplay makes it hard to imagine that this story was just thrown around on top of the gameplay late in development in the same way it was for Tears of the Kingdom. If only there was someone I could ask about the process of making the game. Hey, wait a second.
I'm a huge Zelda fan, and even the games that I'm the most critical of. There's still many things I admire about them. Their approach to storytelling has always bugged the hell out of me. Outer Wilds would not have worked with that approach, right? Like as I mentioned, like we started thinking about the story very early on because we had to. Like the structure of Outer Wilds is fundamentally narrative design. Outer Wilds was mechanics first in a certain sense. Like my angle early on was just, I want to make a spaceship that works in Unity with tiny planetoids and coming up with little interactions. Outer Wilds was mechanics first in that sense. But in terms of the whole project timeline, the narrative was was the focus for most of it, right?
Being the massive fan of both Zelda and Outer Wilds that I am, I can't help but want to apply some of the strengths of Outer Wilds' storytelling approach to Tears of the Kingdom to try and fix the issues we've been talking about. Let's just tackle them in order. Ugh. Okay. First up, have answers to the questions your players have in your mystery game, and don't be afraid to let the story influence the gameplay. For example, the disappearance of the Sheik attack. Maybe everyone is disassembling it because they don't want Ganon to be able to control or manipulate it ever again. It could be that Purah and Robbie are reverse engineering the technology without whatever vulnerability allowed Ganon to possess it. A major theme in Tears of the Kingdom is everyone across Hyrule working together to move forward after the calamity, so I'd say this explanation would fit right in. If you wanted, you could even introduce some side quests where Link has to cart off some old Sheik attack to labs for disassembly, something which would make use of the vehicle building mechanics in the game. Next, let's talk about the memories. The way they're implemented in the game now is severely flawed, and honestly, it needs a full overhaul. Here's what I came up with. For starters, let's avoid unnecessary flashbacks and references to other memories. Looking at you, Sword Geoglyph. Not only do these spoil things and completely invalidate other memories, their inclusion also shows that lack of faith in the player Alex was talking about. If we have the context, we can put the pieces together ourselves, Nintendo. Still, there are some cases where spoiling things that previously happened is inevitable. This is where things get tricky for the existing story.
I think Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild's problem when it comes to that type of narrative, honestly, I think that the story they are telling is too short and too simple to justify being cut into that many pieces. Like, I think that would just be easier to solve if there was just more going on. If the story only works told linearly, just make it, I know this is a cop-out, but just make it where whichever tier you find first tells you the first bit of the story.
I like both of Alex's ideas here, and I think they work well into what we're already changing. If we're answering more questions that players have, memories can contain a more diverse number of plot points, perhaps a scaled-down version of the curiosity structure from Outer Wilds. Instead of just Zelda, there could be memories from Rauru that further explore his character and what happened to the rest of the Zonai, memories from Ganondorf that show us more of his plan and motivations, and memories from the sages that explain anything about them at all. Bonus points if that means we don't have to also watch the same cutscene at the end of every dungeon. Finding the most spoilery memories could be locked behind players having seen earlier memories in the series. The game could prevent these memories from appearing until the end like they do with Zelda's last memory, or they could adopt Outer Wilds' approach of hiding the memories in places the player would only think to look after having watched the related ones. Hiding only a few key memories would give the player freedom to explore most of the story at any pace they like, even more than Outer Wilds, and I think that's more fitting for Zelda, but it also lets the game get many of the advantages of Outer Wilds' approach. I also think it's worth noting that the memories could be used to teach players various mechanics or options within the game's systems like Outer Wilds does. These probably wouldn't be major reveals in the same way they are for that game, but teaching players uses for items or novel ways to use their abilities could serve as an additional motivation for players to view memories, and it would fit right into Nintendo's philosophy about using the story to teach game mechanics to the player. I think these changes would do a lot to make Tears of the Kingdom's story better align with the rest of the game. They aren't all perfect. We're still trying to graft a story around an existing structure, a problem that stems from a deeper issue with Nintendo's philosophy that can't really be dealt with without significantly altering Tears of the Kingdom's DNA. To some extent, I think fully addressing the storytelling in Tears of the Kingdom would mean making a different game entirely. One where the story and mechanics complement each other, rather than being awkwardly fit together.
My plea to open world developers, I really do think that the reason we ended up making something that worked and resonated with players and like worked as an open world kind of experience the way we did is because we kept narrative so closely tied to design. I really think that there's like writing and world building and narrative design and then just actual design. Like the more those disciplines talk to each other and the more that like you care about each one, I really do think that matters for open world games more than almost like any other type of game. It matters for every type of game. It's just I just think it's hard to do an open world because they feed off of each other in such cool ways. And in particular with Outer Wilds, I think the thing that we did manage to achieve is if you can somehow make learning the story required for advancing the game, players get more invested in the story as a result. And they get more invested in the gameplay and the world. It's like all a net positive. This is me being selfish. I want to play an open world game where I'm exploring and learning cool rules about the world, right? And those games do it to some, like there are examples in those games. I just want someone to crank that dial to 11. I think whoever does that will have something really cool on their hands.